from where they had been eating. Scion stopped walking and pointed to a large, dead tree. The trunk was about 3 meters wide and 6 meters high. The top was jagged and irregular, clearly only the base of a once much larger tree. There was a large hole at the bottom of the trunk, leading down into the earth. The opening was about 3 feet tall. Richter could probably make his way into it, but it would be tight. Okay, great. An old dead tree. Is it a long-lost relative? Scion huffed in irritation. No, guilty. The translation was something like irritating fool, as best as Richter could make out with his gift of tongues ability. This was an offshoot. It was the beginning of a hearth tree long ago. Something obviously happened. Scion picked up the bark with the gray-red paste on it and tossed it down the hole. But the hearth tree is huge, Richter protested. This thing is a toothpick in comparison. That's because our hearth tree is built on a place of power. Normally, hearth trees are just the center of a wood sprite community. Those sprites may live within it if it gets big enough. So finding this is like finding a piece of your history, Richter asked. History had never really been his strong point. He still shuddered when he thought about the historical tours his grandmother would drag him on. At some point, people just need to admit that looking at old homes in Gatlinburg was not that great. Yes, it is, Scion said with his previous excitement. He either did not pick up on or decided to ignore Richter's nonplussed tone. And why not? He was just talking to a Gyoti, after all. More important, though, is that the seed core might still be viable. Richter just looked at him. Scion peered at Richter from the corner of his eye, then looked back at the tree, then peered again, this time with a small turn of his head, then looked back at the tree. This continued for a good 5 minutes, with Richter just staring at the sprite. The human's stubborn resistance finally won out. Do you know what that means? Scion asked, exasperated. You know that I don't. You knew before you said it that I didn't know what a seed core was. You could have just called it a mystical booty scratcher. I still wouldn't know. Just tell me. Fine. You humans are so cranky and impatient. A seed core, Scion paused for a moment. Richter was sure just to mess with him, is how you make a hearth tree, a guardian wood, or a host of other magical trees. One of the sacred duties of my people is to further the cause of good by growing magical trees for the betterment of all. Oh, so it's like a stem cell? Scion looked at him, confused. Richter gave his best sarcastic grin. Not so fun when someone drops a term you don't know, is it? Changing his expression to one of gracious forbearance, he said, You may continue. Grinding his teeth, Scion said, The point is, the hearth tree only makes a seed core once every few hundred years, if that. If the core is still viable, it will be a wonderful boon. This tree looks like it has been dead for a long time, Scion. Why would you think that this seed core thing wasn't dead too? The core is a source of great magical power. It gives to nature, but also is maintained by it. As long as its power is not drawn upon too much or too fast, it can sustain itself almost indefinitely. Okay, I'm sold, Richter said. How do we check? We simply need to go down into the bowels of the tree and see if we can find it. I should be able to feel a resonance if I'm close enough. It will be a round sphere about yay big. Scion held his hands apart, showing something the size of a grapefruit. Okay, that won't take long. Let's do it, Richter said. Scion looked at him a moment, opening his mouth to speak, and then closing it again, looking indecisive. What is it? Richter asked. Well, from the stories I have heard, if a seed core is ever left out for a long period of time, it has the tendency to attract monsters. The healing and regenerative properties of the core can be used to make the monster stronger, more resilient, or bigger. What do you mean exactly by bigger? Just that. The elders told stories of giant ants or snakes. I'm sure that they were exaggerating. Besides, we don't need to worry about that here. Phew. For a second I thought we were going to be overrun with flesh-eating beetles or something, Richter said with a small laugh. He had never really been a big fan of bugs. The sprite laughed in return. No, there are no flesh-eating beetles in the forest of Nadria. There was a short pause. What we do have is a vicious animal called a Skeeling. It's usually only about the size of a badger. It's completely blind but has excellent hearing. It's subterranean, and they normally do not wander to the surface. The animal has rigid scales and a very distinctive smell. They have been known to burrow under trees and eat the roots, killing the tree. You can understand that it is a pest we try to get rid of whenever we can." Richter nodded along. He thought it was remarkable that Scion had so much information about this one specific forest creature, but he also wondered why he was focusing so much on it. The sprite continued. "Now, Skeelings are mean and fast. They have 2 rows of sharp teeth that can tear through an animal in seconds. Luckily, they hate the extract of red vine mixed with iron leaf. It's bad enough that it drives them out of their holes and above ground. Then they are much easier to kill. Now, when I was wandering earlier, I found this." He tossed a flat, palm-sized rock to Richter. "I didn't know what it was at first. It had ridges like a Skeeling scale, but was way too big. Most scales on adult male Skeelings are about the size of your thumbnail. Are you following me so far?" Richter nodded again, starting to feel uneasy about story time. "Well, now that I have found this old hearth tree, it makes sense that a Skeeling might have made its home underneath." "Okay, so you want to drive it out from underneath the tree?" "Yes. As I said, it would only take a mixture of red vine and iron leaf. We toss it down the hole, and the Skeeling is so angry it comes to the surface. Then we can kill it and look for the seed core." "Scion," Richter said quietly, "does red vine and iron leaf make a grayish-red paste when you mix them?" "It does," the sprite said in an innocent voice, with a smile on his face. "Would you want to avoid getting it on your skin?" "Oh, yes. It causes horrible itching," the sprite replied. "That's why it's best to keep it in a container, or on something like a bark plate." Richter said. "And if you were to throw something like that mixture down a hole, how long would it take for the Skeeling to react?" Scion replied. "That is actually a fascinating topic. Now that you ask it, it would depend on time of day. Skeelings are nocturnal. If it were to be exposed to red vine and iron leaf at night, it would go into an immediate rage. If, however, it were to smell the mixture during the daytime—" "Like now, you mean?" Richter interjected. "Yes, Richter, like now. Well, in that case, it might take a few minutes to wake it up, but I can promise you it would be extra furious when it did." "So it might take almost exactly the amount of time it took you to relate all of this information?" "About that amount of time. Yes, Richter," Scion replied. Losing patience, Richter asked, "Okay, so what do we do after it comes up?" "Well," Scion replied with an evil grin, "depending on your perspective, this is the easiest part. Just run, and I'll kill it before it eats you." The ground in front of the tree exploded upward, and a shrill screech filled the air. The Skeeling was not the size of a badger. The thing was the size of a brown bear. It had an armored carapace like an armadillo. The 4 legs of the creature ended in 3-fingered paws. Each finger was tipped with a wicked black talon, arched slightly inward towards the palm. It was off-white in color, and its face resembled a rodent of some kind. The eyelids were closed, and 2 large triangular ears stuck straight up from its head. The snout was rat-like, but when it threw back its head and shrieked, the teeth were flat and tapered to be sharp at the bottom. "Run!" Scion shouted. The sprite had begun imbuing an arrow as soon as the creature appeared. He struck it in the side, and the arrow impacted with its customary boom. The Skeeling fell, knocking over a small tree, but got back up quickly. The arrow hadn't pierced its hide. "This might be a problem," the sprite called out. As the Skeeling began running towards them, attracted by the sound of their voices, Richter looked over and shouted, "You think? Move!" The sprite jumped up into the tree he had been standing underneath. Richter didn't waste time firing an arrow, but cast weak haste on himself instead. Then he enacted the second phase of his master plan. He ran his butt off. Weak haste let him keep ahead of the monster that was clearly attracted to his footsteps. Not by very much, however. Scion rained down shots on the creature, which slowed it down, but did little damage against its armored hide. As Richter ran for his life, he realized his current situation was probably due to poor communication. He was all for taking initiative and pursuing one's own personal bliss, but Scion could have given him a better heads up. He really needed to have a discussion with the sprite and teach him that communication was the foundation for any true friendship. Then maybe in the future, he could avoid narrowly being eaten by a horrible albino rat monster. Of course, maybe all of this was happening because Scion was just a dick and needed him to act like bait. Ah! Ah! Richter screamed. The tip of the Skeeling's claws had caught him on the back and disrupted his reflective train of thought. Most of the damage was blocked by his armor, but blood freely flowed down from his right shoulder. He put on a burst of extra speed to add some distance between himself and the monster. The running and dodging had taken them exactly opposite in the small clearing to the tree that Scion was hiding in. The sprite was imbuing his arrow for another strike. Richter began running at the tree and counted the seconds that he saw the aura. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The blue aura was blinding. The churning of earth and heavy padfalls of the Skeeling could be heard getting closer behind Richter. At a distance of only 10 yards, Richter dove forward, and a split second later, Scion released. Richter landed badly, wrenching his ankle. He rolled over and drew his short sword. Hopefully, he could at least wound the creature and drive it off. He really did not want to be eaten again. He was worrying for nothing, though. The last arrow had connected, whereas strikes to the beast's body had failed to produce an effect. Scion's overpowered shot to the Skeeling's face made it nosedive into the ground. Its body created a furrow in the ground 10 feet long. It lay motionless for a few moments, and then lifted its head to screech again in rage and defiance. Richter had not wasted time, though. He hobbled forward, arm held low and cocked, then rammed his blade into the creature's eye. A faint pop could be felt up his sword arm as he penetrated the eye, followed quickly by the crunch of facial bones and then a meaty resistance as his blade entered gray matter. Without even a death cry, the Skeeling's head became dead weight, and Richter withdrew his weapon to the sound of further grating of bones. He looked up at the sprite's triumphant face and communicated what was in his heart. "You're an asshole!" The story continues. For more fun information and to contact the author, please go to www.litrpg.com. That is www.litrpg.com.